I used to think marriage was all about love, trust, and putting in effort. That's what I believed when I married Grace 7 years ago. I wasn't perfect, but I was committed. I worked hard, made sure the bills were paid, and always put her needs ahead of mine, but slowly things began to change. It was subtle at first, so much that I overlooked it. At first, it was small things. Grace stopped greeting me when I came home. Stopped texting me during the day like she used to. I told myself she was just tired. Maybe overwhelmed by work. But even at home, it felt like I wasn't really there anymore. She barely looked at me or spoke to me. Nights that used to be filled with conversation and laughter turned into her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, or retreating to the bedroom early. The connection we once had, the intimacy, seemed to disappear like a candle snuffed out by the wind. I tried to be patient. I kept asking her, "Is everything okay?" But her answer was always the same. "I'm fine." Without ever looking up from her phone, but I knew something wasn't right, and neither was our marriage. I started noticing the pattern. If I didn't reach out, nothing would happen. If I didn't text first, there'd be no conversation. If I didn't initiate affection, it didn't exist. If I didn't plan date nights, we didn't have them. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, maybe stress, but deep down, I knew better. People make time for what matters. And I wasn't one of those things anymore. Whenever I suggested doing something to bring us closer, she had an excuse. "I'm too tired. I have a headache. Maybe another time." But that other time never came. One Friday night, I decided to do something special. I left work early, went to the store, and bought everything I needed to make her favorite meal. Pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread on the side, and a nice bottle of wine. I set the table, dimmed the lights, and even lit a few candles, just like I used to when we were newlyweds. I waited, hoping tonight would be different. She came in around 7:00 p.m., tossed her bag onto the chair, and barely glanced at me when I greeted her. "Hey," she muttered. I smiled, trying to keep the mood light, but her eyes flickered to the table, to the meal I had spent hours preparing. She didn't smile, didn't look touched or happy. "I already ate," she said as she slipped off her shoes. My chest heightened. "You already ate?" I asked quietly. "Yeah. I grabbed something with the girls after work," she replied before walking over the couch, sitting down and pulling out her phone like I wasn't even there. I sat across from her, waiting, hoping she'd notice the disappointment on my face. At least acknowledge the effort I put in. But she didn't. She just kept scrolling. Her face lit by the phone screen, completely detached. After a few minutes, I finally spoke. "Grace," I said. She didn't look up. "Are we okay?" She sighed like I was wasting her time. "Justin, why you keep asking me that?" "Because we don't talk anymore," I replied. "Because you don't even look at me the way you used to." She rolled her eyes. "I'm just tired. Not everything has to be some big problem." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to convince myself that maybe she was really just tired. But deep down, I knew she wasn't tired. She just wasn't interested anymore. I kept trying to ignore it, convincing myself that every couple goes through rough patches and that she'd eventually snap out of it. But the truth was, I was living with a stranger. She wasn't my wife anymore, at least not the person I married. She was just someone who lived in the same house as me, barely acknowledging my presence. I had been demoted from husband to background character in her life. Then one night, things hit their breaking point. We had dinner, or at least I did. Grace barely touched her food. Still glued her phone. Afterward, I cleaned up things we used to do together. Things we used to share now felt like a chore. When I walked back into the living room, she was curled up on the couch, still on her phone, her face blank and illuminated by the screen. I stood there for a moment, watching her. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. Enough. I walked over and sat beside her. Grace, we need to talk. She didn't look up. About what? About us? About this distance between us? She sighed and finally put her phone down, but there was no anger, no nervousness in her face. She just looked bored. Justin, I don't know what you want from me. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. I want my wife back. She scoffed and crossed her arms. I haven't gone anywhere. I let out a slow breath. Try and keep my cool. Then why do I feel like I'm married to a ghost? We haven't been close in months. You barely touch me, barely speak to me. You don't even act like you want to be in the same room as me. She rolled her eyes. I told you I'm tired. Can't you just understand that? Tired? I repeated, you're tired all the time. That's all I ever hear. But all I see is you making excuses to avoid being close to me. She shook her head. Oh, so now you know how I feel, huh? Well, if I feel like it, I will. And if I don't, then I won't. Simple as that. And then she said it. What I do with my body is none of your business. The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't process it at first. What? I whispered. She leaned back against the couch, arms still crossed, indifferent. Just because we're married doesn't mean I owe you anything. It felt like something inside me cracked. I wasn't asking for something, just the bare minimum. I didn't know where to go from here, but I knew everything had changed. I had been holding on, not asking for much in return, just a connection, some grace. But Grace didn't seem to understand. I wasn't doing this out of obligation. I was doing it out of love. I wanted to be close to the person I had chosen to marry. She laughed dryly, dismissing my words as overdramatic. Not everything has to be about you, Justin, she said, her voice cold. In that moment, a suffocating silence spread between us. And I knew I was the only one still holding on. And that was the moment I let go. I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, and all I could see was someone who had checked out long before this conversation. I had spent months begging for affection, making excuses for her distance, convincing myself that if I just waited, if I work harder, she would come back to me. But now I realized the truth. She had already left. She had been waiting for me to catch up. Something inside me shifted, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. I stood up and Grace frowned. What does that mean? She asked. I grabbed my jacket and slid it on. It means I hear you loud and clear. Her laugh was dry, almost amused. So, what? You're leaving? I didn't raise my voice or try to make a dramatic exit. I just walked out, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. That night, I checked into a hotel. I didn't know where else to go. My hands were still shaking when I handed over my credit card at the front desk, my mind spinning from what had just happened. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, staring at the wall, waiting for some kind of emotional response, regret, sadness, anger. But all I felt was exhaustion. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting anymore. I considered texting Grace, expecting her to reach out, at least pretending to care. But hours passed, then a whole day. Then another. Nothing. That's when I knew I had made the right choice. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't devastated. She wasn't even curious about where I was. She had gotten so used to me always being there, chasing after her, that she assumed I would come back on my own. But I wasn't coming back. A week later, I finally got a message from her. Are you really leaving over this? Grow up. I stare at the screen, rereading the words. waiting for some emotion to hit me. But there was nothing. That was all I needed to know. The next day, I filed for divorce. At first, she didn't take it seriously. She thought I was bluffing, trying to teach her some kind of lesson. But when the papers arrived, the reality hit her. That's when the call started. Texts, late-night voicemails, all filled with a tearful voice begging me to reconsider. "Justin, please. I didn't mean it. I'll do better. We can fix this. You can't just throw this away." But she was wrong. I hadn't thrown anything away. She had a long time ago. She begged me to reconsider. But I had already given her every chance to fix things when it still mattered. Love isn't just words. It's actions. And her actions had shown me where I stood. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just someone she had gotten used to, someone she assumed would always be there, no matter how little effort she put in. So, I let go. I moved forward piece by piece. Some nights were harder than others. There were moments when I found myself reaching for my phone, tempted to fall into old habits. But then, I remembered the way she had looked at me that night on the couch, her complete lack of emotion when she told me that my feelings didn't matter. That wasn't something you say to someone you love. That was something you say when you've already stopped caring. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. Signing the papers felt surreal. I had expected to feel regret, maybe a sense of loss, but when I slid the documents across the table and placed my pen down, all I felt was relief. I was free with that chapter of my life closed. I began rebuilding. I focused on work, spent more time with friends, and even picked up some old hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage. And then I met Maria. Maria was everything Grace wasn't. Where Grace had been distant, Maria was present. Where Grace had been indifferent, Maria made me feel seen. We met by chance. And before I knew it, we were spending more time together. Our conversations turned into dates. And those dates led to something I hadn't felt in years. Happiness. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing. I was living. Then one evening, Grace showed up. It was late, just past 8:00 p.m., when I heard the knock on my door. I hesitated before opening it, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery I had forgotten about. But when I swung the door open, there she was, Grace. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. She looked smaller somehow. Like she had lost the confidence she once carried so effortlessly. "Justin," she whispered. Behind me, Maria stood in the living room, looking toward the door. Grace's eyes flickered to her, then back to me, her face twisted in anger. "Who the hell is she?" I sighed, already exhausted by the situation. "This is Maria, my girlfriend." Grace's mouth opened and closed. Then she let out a bitter laugh. "Wow!" she scoffed, shaking her head. "You really moved on that fast." "Grace, why are you here?" I asked, my patience thinning. She ran a hand through her hair, her expression shifting from anger to something more fragile. "I tried dating," she admitted. "I tried moving on, but nothing lasted. And now I realize it was always you. It was always supposed to be you." I swallowed, feeling a strange mix of pity. Maybe frustration, but no love. That part of me had died the night. She told me my feelings didn't matter. "It's too late, Grace," I said evenly. "I begged you to care when it mattered. I fought for us and you didn't. Now you want to come back because you're lonely. Because dating didn't work out for you." Her face twisted in anger. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she snapped. "After everything we've been through." "No, Grace," I said, my voice firm. "After everything I've been through." She stood there breathing heavily, her fists clenched at her sides. You think she's different? Grace scoffed. She'll walk away just like I did, just like they all do. Maria didn't flinch. She simply slipped her hand into mine. Standing by my side. Grace's expression shattered. She had expected me to let her back in. She had expected the old Justin, the one who always forgave, always waited, always stayed. But that man was gone. We're over, Grace. I said, finally. Don't come back here again. She stood there for a moment longer, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to argue, but then without another word, she turned and walked away. I closed the door and locked it behind her. Maria squeezed my hand. Are you okay? She asked softly. I turned to her and for the first time in a long time I smiled. Yeah, I said.